This is America's one and only Jewish Moments in the Morning radio program, heard on listeners-sponsored digital radio. Around the world, the web at NachumSegal.com, on the Nachum Segal Network, and, of course, on the beloved NSN app. With us live via telephone is Rabbi Steven Pruzansky, one of our favorite guests, frankly. He is serving as Israel Region Vice President of the Coalition for Jewish Values, Senior Rabbinic Scholar at Yeshivat Migdal HaTorah in Modi'in, Senior Research Associate at the Jerusalem Center for Applied Policy, and a longtime pro-Israel commentator. Rabbi Steven Pruzansky, a pleasure to welcome you back to JM in the AM.
Nachum, good morning to you and all your listeners.
Appreciate that. The first thing I'm curious about, and thank God I've heard from people in Israel that it was a quiet night last night. Let's work our way backwards. We'll start with the news from yesterday, then we'll go back to the whole, Trump-Israel thing. In terms of yesterday, do you think that now that the President of the United States has declared that the ceasefire is over, do you think we're in for another round of missiles and rockets at Israel? Do you think we're in for another round of a U.S./Iran/Israel war? What do you think is going to happen in the aftermath of his declaration?
It's impossible to know because Trump could change his mind in 5 minutes and then change it back in 10 minutes. So it literally is impossible to predict. But I would look at it like this. I don't think most people expected a quiet night last night because this is not directly our fight. This is really Trump exercising what he considers presidential privilege because he's been made to look like a fool. The Iranians played him. They stand to get whatever they want in exchange for promises which they have no inclination to fulfill. And therefore, Trump does not like to be played. And he realizes he's being made look like a fool. In other words, at the end of the entire process of the war and all the talk and the braggadocio, Iran wound up from one perspective, in a better position than they were before.
Right.
Now having asserted control over the Straits of Hormuz. They never had that before. And this was to the horror of the Gulf countries, America's allies, which have been fighting for well over 80 years not to allow Iranian control over the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. And here, Trump agreed to it, essentially. So I would say, though, in Israel, it's important to remember this. There are times when there's a surface calm and turmoil underneath. And I think that's where we are now. There's a surface calm, but we know that something has to happen. It's not going to just end like this. Other times there's surface turmoil and calm underneath, which is really when there's war. The superficially, there's a lot of turmoil going on, but we remain calm and resilient. The thing is about Israel, there's never calm on the exterior and the interior, and there's never turmoil on the exterior and the interior. It's always one or the other.
I guess that only confirms the statement that there hasn't been a quiet day in 78 years. Because it's either not quiet externally or it's not quiet internally.
Right. So there are many quiet days externally, but we know that it's not going to last indefinitely, and that's the turmoil underneath.
So if you go ahead and conclude, as you just did, that till now Iran has made a fool of President Trump, and it's hard to argue with that. If, in fact, Trump does feel that Israel dragged him into this war, that really the impetus was to destroy the nuclear capability of Iran, again, a favor for U.S. citizens, but maybe more of a favor for Israel. That's the way it's being perceived. Do you think there is an underlying resentment from the White House to Jerusalem, even with the proposed visit of Netanyahu to Washington? Do you think that this is real, that there's a rift that could last a while between the two?
I don't think there's a rift. I think it is exaggerated. There certainly are people in America who think that Israel dragged the U.S. into war. I don't believe that, especially when we consider both the very recent and less recent history. I mean, going back both this past April and February as well, or June and April and February, because basically what Trump called the 12-day war was an 11-day 15-hour war that Israel fought. And then there was a 9-hour war that America fought. America essentially bombed Iran going back a year for 30 minutes. Yeah, the flights were much longer, but it was 30 minutes. And only then, after it was demonstrated that there was little to no risk coming to American planes from Iranian defenses. In other words, we eliminated Iranian's air defense system over multiple months of attacks. And Trump benefited from that, took advantage of that, which is fine. He's now in a situation, even with the increased fighting, the escalation of the last few days, he's basically only bombing infrastructure and small ships that are affecting the navigation through the Straits of Hormuz. He's not doing anything that is going to transform the situation or ultimately weaken the regime. As, for example, if he conquered Kharg Island or decided to destroy their oil wells or energy infrastructure or bridges, which is what Iran is trying to do in the Gulf states. So he could blame Israel for not having a perfect outcome, but the imperfection of the outcome is more attributable to him and to what his application of American force was to be in this conflict. He's minimalizing what America is capable of doing in order to limit the number of American casualties, right, which is fine in and of itself, but then don't expect outcomes that presuppose a massive surge of power and force, because that he's not willing to do.
So what about
in essence, he's not willing to win the war.
Right. So what about the other side of the coin then? If that's the perspective of whether, the U.S. should be blaming Israel, what about Israel blaming the U.S.? Is it legitimate when so many Israel lovers are going out there saying, wow, Trump really betrayed us. Trump had the opportunity to finish the job. Trump had the opportunity to do what Israel has asked him to do, and he completely neglected us. Is there any legitimacy to that?
I wouldn't say that myself. Look, the fact is that there is a sense here that the American military did underperform. Now, they may have underperformed because of limited objectives, but they did underperform. You just look at the number of American aircraft that was shot down. It's about 25 versus the Israeli that was shot down, which is 0. So there was an underperformance, but then again, there was also limited objectives that they tried to approve, that they approved. But I would say that from a Trump perspective, and really from a mature Israeli perspective, I don't want the Americans fighting our battles. And I don't want America risking its troops except to something that advances American interests. Now, obviously, a weakened Iran does advance American interests because it does boost the standing of America's allies, and it does weaken Iran as a nefarious force, which, as we recall, has been attacking America since 1979. Right. So there is an American interest in weakening Iran and certainly in regime change. But if the U.S. is not willing to do what's necessary to bring that about, then that is a sober, I would say, rational analysis of what their interests are. That doesn't mean it's right.
Understood. Rabbi Steven Pruzansky is with us live from Israel. You understand the military and naval stuff a lot better than I do. How does a country, especially when Trump declares that he's destroyed their Navy, and we know how much of their leadership has been eliminated over the last few months, how does a country like that go ahead and effectively shut down the Straits of Hormuz? How do they take it over to a point where they've got the U.S. where they want them? How's it possible when so much of the leadership is gone and apparently so much of their military and Navy no longer exists?
Yes, well, I mean, part of the issue is, of course, very Trumpian. He has a tendency to exaggerate and maybe put it like this in a gentle way. Not all of his words have a counterpart in reality. The fact is, they have military capabilities. They, in fact, just yesterday was reported they've regained use of half the missile launchers that were destroyed by Israel over a year ago. So they did suffer losses. Those losses could have been more meaningful had they been followed up with real action that could have produced regime change. One of the more dangerous elements that we're dealing with now, that at the Jerusalem Center for Applied Policy we're dealing with as well, is the rise of Turkey. Turkey is going to be a very difficult foe in the future because they share the same hegemonic, genocidal ambitions towards Israel as Iran, but they're also an American ally and a member of NATO. And so they're particularly harmful force. So I was just reading the other day that the Americans and others, whether it's Israel, I don't know, I won't say, have already armed the Kurds. But it was Erdogan who put a stop to a Kurdish advance in the northern part of Iran, which could have then been a pincer movement. The Kurds from the north and the Americans from the south, with or without the Israelis, that would have really crushed the regime. Erdogan put a stop to that because he's afraid of his own Kurds and a Kurdish uprising, because the Kurds are the most oppressed minority in the world today. And because he's afraid of his own Kurds, that's why he stopped this plan. Big problem, because the only way to topple the regime is to have the regime feel that it has no alternative. It has no economy, and it has no vision for the future. Right now, Trump helped them rebuild the economy and replenish some of their coffers. And at the same time, he succeeded in depressing, both psychologically and realistically, all the opposition elements in Iran when he promised help was on the way. But help really was not on the way.
Well, 2 points then. On the Erdogan thing and Turkey in general, what happened? What was the watershed moment that turned Israel and Turkey from friendliness to now, as you called them, foes?
Oh, well, that's a very simple, there's a simple answer to that question. Erdogan is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood has a 100-year plan to take over the West. Part of the plan is already being activated and visible in America. They've succeeded in taking over many college campuses as well as local school boards of education. And that's why you see, like on October 8th already, there was an infrastructure in place to oppose Israel and to defend radical Islamic terrorism. That all comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, which the tip of the spear in the U.S. today is both Turkey and Qatar.
So why'd they get along before that? Why did Erdogan?
Because Turkey was a secular Muslim republic. And when Erdogan took power, and by the way, he's maintained power as a dictator by rigging elections, now going on more than 2 decades, his goal was to become the hegemon in the region. And that involves, of course, one of the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood is to destroy any non-Islamic presence in the Middle East. That was Iran's goal. And now this is Turkey's goal. But the nature of Turkish society changed. It became a heavily Islamic society as opposed to one which was secular. I visited Turkey in 2000. It's a very open society. I wouldn't go back there today.
So if I remember,
it's a radical Muslim society.
So if I remember Turkey and Israel 2000 to 2010, that was a transition time. It was still good. You traveled there, as you said.
The Mavi Marmara was a turning point because then you saw that Turkey was already allied openly with Hamas, arming and funding Hamas, and they're the ones who sent this. It was a Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara. That was all Erdogan. And the fact that we apologized for defending ourselves was a big mistake going back 15 years. But you know, the Israeli Foreign Ministry establishment has always had this vision of restoring ties with Turkey to the way they were while it was a secular Muslim republic. Remember, Turkey was the first and only Muslim state to recognize Israel in 1949 until Erdogan.
And you think that's ridiculous at this point?
Of course, right. Someone just wrote recently, nostalgia is not a policy or a strategy.
That's so good. I love that.
And this is exactly what the Israeli Foreign Ministry establishment has been relying on for the better part of 2 decades. Nostalgia for what once was. And yeah, we still import dates from Turkey.
Right.
And there is a Jewish community there, but it's an endangered community because of the nature of Turkish society. It's completely changed. It could change back, but now it's not what it was.
I got to share that with my staff. Nostalgia is not a policy. You could use that in a lot of situations. Rabbi Steven Pruzansky is with us. Also, and the second point is on the Iranian people piece. Here in the U.S., I hear so many commentators saying how the Iranian people, the street, however you want to refer to them, are so much in favor of what the U.S. is doing and hope they topple the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't you think that's exaggerated and overblown? Don't you get the feeling, especially in this week of the funeral in Iran, don't you get the feeling that the majority of the people in Iran really are with their government and with their regime?
I believe you're correct, and I believe that is a Western fantasy that really comes from projection, meaning they think, well, how would we like to live in a radical Muslim state, and we wouldn't want it, so we assume that others would not want it as well. I think most of Iran actually supports the government. Most of Iran, they, like you say, look at the tens of millions showing up for the funeral. All right, we can say that some of them might be coerced into coming, but not all of them. Not all of them. I mean, there is the North Korea phenomenon where people, for a couple of shekels could start to cry also at the death of a leader. There is that too, but I don't get that sense with Iranian society. They're a sophisticated group, and yet they have embraced this radical Islamic philosophy.
And it's not outrageous to say that most of them are okay with it. I think most of them. It's hard for us to comprehend that, but it's
right. Most of them support the government because, look, it is a tyranny, and it is a government that encroaches brutally on what we deem to be people's freedoms. I mean, until just a short time ago, they were beating and imprisoning women who were not wearing a hijab. Now, we would think that if indeed most women did not want that, we would hear about it. Certainly some didn't. They're the ones who were executed or otherwise in prison. But did tens of millions of women go out to protest the government? No. Maybe hundreds did, maybe in the low thousands. Well, the low thousands in a country of 91 million people is not a large number.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to wake up to reality, and I think that's the reality.
Right. I think if the government was toppled and, let's say, a more moderate regime was installed, then people would say, okay, so let's go back to living a normal... Remember, Iran, just like Turkey, Iran was also a Muslim state, non-Arab Muslim, as was Turkey, that also had relations with Israel through up until 1979. And it's completely changed.
Rabbi Pruzansky, you spent some time in the United States of America. Do you remember that? You remember your time in the United States of America?
I did. It's a fading memory, but I do come back on occasion to revive those memories.
I speak to you, in fact, from West Englewood Avenue, where you have about 8 choices of where to eat across the street from me.
Yes.
Just letting you know. Right. Anyway, what's my point? My point is I don't have to tell you, but I do have to remind the audience how different, special, and distinguishable days are in Israel compared to the diaspora. Shabbos has a flavor of it in Israel we don't have in the diaspora. Hanukkah, name any holiday you want, then we can make that argument. I'm curious about the 3 weeks. Does it feel different in Israel than it would in the diaspora?
It does. I feel it. I do sense, though, I'm not blaming them, I'm just pointing this out, that because the Sfardim, the Eidat Mizrach, do not generally begin the Avelut until the 9 days, until Rosh Chodesh Av, next Wednesday, and some of them not even until Shavua Shechal Bo.
Especially this year, right?
Right. So you don't really feel it until then. Right. But one would be surprised at the number of public figures that we'll start seeing next week who will not shave during the 9 days. People without kippot, they will not shave during the 9 days, and that's where they feel the real. That's when you feel the real avelud. It builds to that. Certainly during the 9 days, things start to slow down. Tisha B'Av entirely, the country comes to a halt. Most stores don't open till the malls don't open until the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. Right. So really, Shavua Shechal Bo, you feel it more. But in the early days, I feel it. All right, but I can't say you feel it necessarily in the country. Right. Come Rosh Chodesh Av, then it's completely different.
You feel like a nation where you are. People who think that they feel like a nation here, I think they're fooling themselves a bit. You feel like
right. Well, Rav Kook said many times that in the exile, Jews are really a conglomerate of individuals. There is no national sense. There could be brotherhood and solidarity, etc., but basically people live their own lives. In Israel, there's a nation. It's a family. And so as a nation and a family, you feel for one another, you feud with one another, and ultimately you build a society.
Wow. And you're lucky enough to be there, thank God.
Thank God. Thank God. It's wonderful. And by the way, I mentioned the turmoil underneath. It's not for now, but the turmoil underneath is the upcoming election campaign. Yeah. It's going to be very, very bitter, but we can say that for another time.
And I think we're lucky that there's a long holiday season in the entire month of September. So what you just described will hopefully only be happening over a period of a few weeks.
Yes, I think once the date of the election is set, more or less they've agreed sometime around October 20th. But once it's officially set and then new parties are created, see, it's different than the American experience. You have the two parties and that's it. And they've been the same basically for almost 170 years. In Israel, new parties will be arising. Doesn't mean they'll be successful, but They will make an initial impact. And there'll be also a musical chair sort of approach to people jumping from one party to another. Those in the Knesset want to stay there. They'll go wherever they think they have the best chance, and others will start their own parties. So it gets very lively.
Do you think?
Very lively. It'll be very bitter, though, this year also, because the residual hatred of Netanyahu from the left grows each time he wins an election.
Do you think November 1 there'll be a different prime minister than now?
If you ask me at this point, I would think not.
Wow.
I would think he's going to succeed again. I mean, the accurate polls still predict Likud is going to be the largest party. There'll be very fine margins. The religious Zionist party is going to struggle to surpass the threshold. I think they will. Again, it all depends on who else is running in the party. I think they've done a good job, but they have offended people by not opposing the Haredim enough. But be that as it may, we won't know more until the parties are established and the campaign is underway. But at this juncture, I would say Netanyahu clearly has the advantage.
Do you agree with me that obviously there should be an effort, at least I feel so, to incorporate those in the Haredi community into army service or whatever type of national service they would, compromise to or agree to, but imprisoning members of that segment of the community is only counterproductive. Do you agree with that?
I do agree. The bottom line is, and this may surprise some of your viewers, this will be a problem that will never be solved. It will never be solved, especially now that it's a political football. It will never be solved for a number of reasons, including, among them, the Haredi politicians are elected for two reasons: to keep them out of the army and to funnel money to their institutions. So to expect them to essentially repudiate one of the two major reasons that they were elected is not going to happen.
So wait
a second. The army will never accommodate them in a way that's realistic.
But do you agree? But do you agree that if we get to, yesteryear, where there are two major parties with a large number of seats, they could make a coalition that kept the Haredim out of the government? Or you don't think that's realistic?
No, that could very well happen. It will not matter what law is passed. That will not matter. It will not help. They'll go to prison. I mean, I wrote a couple of years ago, they could sit and learn in prison. They could sit and learn in yeshiva. It's the same thing, and it'll cost the government less. So prison doesn't affect them. The notion that you're imprisoning people for learning Torah, of course, is obviously troubling. But you're not going to affect them by threatening them with prison. So the bottom line is, at this point, they think it's an avera, a sin, to go to the army. Everyone else thinks it's a mitzvah to go into the army. You can't convince someone who thinks that it's a mitzvah d'oraita, that something is actually a sin. And that's where we are. It'll only change at one point. It won't change through any legislation, which won't help. If it's legislation that forces them to serve, then they're not going to listen. If it's legislation that exempts them, the Supreme Court will invalidate it. So it'll never be solved. But the bottom line is, the only change that can ever come when more and more Haredim will enter the army and the workforce is if they develop a sense of shame. Shame that, like the Torah says this week, you're gonna send your brethren out to battle and you just sit. Reuven and Gad, they could have said to Moshe, it's not about the cattle. We just want to sit and learn. Somehow I think that would not have impressed Moshe Rabbeinu, who himself went to battle. So that's why it'll never be solved. If they develop as a community a sense of shame, and there's no doubt some of them do, and some of them are enlisted.
Well, there's one other piece. If some of their rabbinic leaders would adjust accordingly, then
right. I wish I could say I agree with you. You are right, but on the other hand, the leadership is tethered to a philosophy that goes back 75 years, which if they would try to modify, they'd be accused of being heretics. I mean, you should understand, and so I hate to bring it up, but you should understand, as should the listeners, Rav Steinman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Aaron Leib Steinman, when he supported even subtly Netzach Yehuda, Nachal Haredi, 2 thugs came to his house to beat him up. He was at the time 100 years old. They beat up 100-year-old Gadol B'Torah because they didn't like the fact that he winked at service in the Nachal Haredi for those who are not learning. If that's the level of the people that we're dealing with, then you can understand why it's not going to be resolved. It'll only be resolved if they develop a sense of shame and a greater attachment to Klal Yisrael, a real attachment to all Jews, and not just their Dalet Amot.
Oh, boy. Well, I guess this is a time of year to be somewhat downtrodden, so you accomplished that. I can tell you.
No. It's, by the way, when I say it'll never be resolved, that's meant to be optimistic, because it gives the politicians something to fight about, right? Look, at present, what are we dealing with? The Haredim run away from the draft law. The secular run towards the draft law. I'm sorry, the Haredim run against the draft law. The secular run for the draft law. And the religious Zionists run away from the draft law. So everyone's running away from it. It's not going to change. But it makes for interesting conversation and debate.
That's for sure. All right, Pruzansky, always enjoy your insight. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and greetings from the holy, beautiful land of Israel to all your listeners. Have
Amazing.
A great day.
Oh, how lucky you are. All right, Steven Pruzansky, always love his insight. Here for you on a Thursday morning broadcast at JM in the AM.